The whole movement of Zionism was created, the concept, the ideology of transforming Judaism from spirituality, a religion, into a materialism, a nationalistic goal to have a piece of land, expressly forbidden in the Torah, because we are in exile by God.
So you shouldn't have a state, you shouldn't have a country, you shouldn't have a government?
We shouldn't have a state, we should be living amongst all the nations.
The Jews had many sects, they have many sects among themselves. Among the famous ones are the Sadducees and the Pharisees. However, all the other sects have phased out. They cease to exist, and the Pharisees have emerged as the sole rulers over the Jews in terms of political leadership, religious leadership, economic leadership. The Pharisees are the most extreme of all these Jewish sects, and they have phased out. All the other sects have phased out, and the Pharisees have emerged as the sole leadership, the only leadership, unchallenged leadership that the Jews have, past and present. The Pharisees, who were the rulers and still continue to be the rulers of the Jews, they see Jesus as their enemy, a threat to them, to challenge their authority, their religious authority. So Jesus has now become their avowed enemy.
When Jesus came on the scene, his reaction was to bitterly denounce this counterfeit tradition. Christ said the Pharisees, by their tradition, had made the law of God of none effect. He considered the Pharisees the most dangerous leadership Israel ever had. In 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. Although Jewish sects such as the Sadducees now disappeared, the Pharisees emerged with even greater power over the Jewish people. The Jewish Encyclopedia describes the new role of the Pharisees. With the destruction of the temple, the Sadducees disappeared altogether, leaving the regulation of all Jewish affairs in the hands of the Pharisees. Henceforth, Jewish life was regulated by the Pharisees. The whole history of Judaism was reconstructed from the Pharisaic point of view. Pharisaism shaped the character of Judaism and the life and thought of the Jew for all of the future. In 135 AD, all Jews were expelled from Palestine. The Pharisees led most Palestinian Jews in a mass migration back to Babylon. The majority of Jews were already in Babylon and had been since the time of Nebuchadnezzar 600 years earlier. Yet around 140 AD, Babylon became the acknowledged land of refuge for world Jewry. For another 1,000 years, Judaism flourished in Babylon under the leadership of the Pharisees. Great academies of the rabbis were established and thousands of new laws formulated. There, those same Pharisees who killed Jesus Christ remained the undisputed rulers of Judaism.
In Babylon, the Pharisees codified their oral traditions into the Babylonian Talmud, the written form of that oral tradition which Jesus so bitterly rebuked. The Talmud reveals how deep was Israel's apostasy. In her beginning, God gave the Hebrews the loftiest, the most upright literature and ethics the world has ever known. Yet when they turned their backs on him, they produced the Talmud, a work which has aptly been called a monument to human folly. The Talmud also helps us understand the basis for Christ's unflattering descriptions of the Pharisees.
Jesus described the Pharisees as hypocrites, children of hell, blind guides, whited sepulchres, full of dead men's bones. He even described the Pharisees as children of their father the devil, a murderer from the beginning. The Talmud confirms Christ's words. In the Talmud, in Treatise Sanhedrin, an extensive passage describes the right of the Pharisee to kill anyone, just as long as he did so indirectly. As one of dozens of examples, the Talmud tells us that if one bound his neighbor and he died of starvation, he is not liable to execution. In such an indirect manner, the Pharisees also killed Christ. Manipulating the Romans to actually wield the spear and sword, the Pharisees claimed, as their descendants do today, that since the Romans were the direct cause of the death of Christ, it is the Romans, not the Jews, who are guilty.
You tell the story about how you tried to find out what the what they call the Mossad when they deal with publicly?
I thought it was a reasonable question, but the trouble is you can't pick up the phone book. There's no Langley in Israel that you can look up, CIA, or in our case, the Mossad. We thought we should ask, what shall we call it in English? You can translate the Hebrew words, as I said, Mossad is institute, but when they write a letter to their friends in the CIA or the British intelligence, what do they call themselves? It took a while. It was a matter of asking the Prime Minister's spokesman. The best you could do, because officially the Mossad is under the Prime Minister's office. And I think he sort of wondered why you want to know and all that, so we explained. And he came up with the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. I mean, if it were to have initials, it would be ISIS. Just simple words like that. Interestingly enough, kind of a British model. The British don't really like the names MI5 and MI6 for their foreign service.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a four-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States.
That there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van. That is right now all I'm hearing, but again, 2 to 3 people in custody, and we are trying to get more information on that right now.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives has anything to do with other events today is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects and they're questioning them as we speak.
It was widely reported that men had been celebrating the attack after recording the first plane strike. They were not Al-Qaeda, but they were detained.
I grabbed my binoculars and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van and, hollered over my lieutenant. I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins. But when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States.
Sitting and staying, please.
Here's how the system works. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the phone companies by Amdocs Limited, an Israeli-based private telecommunications company. Amdocs has contracts with the 25 biggest phone companies in America and more worldwide. The White House and other secure government phone lines are protected, but it is virtually impossible to make a call on normal phones without generating an Amdocs record of it.
As Carl Cameron reported, U.S. investigators digging into the 9/11 terrorist attacks fear that suspects may have been tipped off to what they were doing by information leaking out of Amdocs. In tonight's report, we learned that the concern about phone security extends to another company founded in Israel that provides the technology that the U.S. government uses for electronic eavesdropping. Here is Carl Cameron's third report.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Comverse insists the equipment it installs is secure, but the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Comverse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Comverse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Comverse is considered career suicide. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Comverse is considered career suicide.
The men who were detained due to the report they were taping the first plane crash and then celebrating and joking about it actually went on television and admitted it was their job to record the attack.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
How could they have known about the attack? And who sent them to document it? The evidence points to a large intelligence network inside the United States that had teams on the ground, such as the ones recording the attack, and electronic surveillance teams gathering information.
So what can we make of all this? For big picture analysis, we also turn to former CIA operative and chief of the Bin Laden unit, Michael Scheuer. Michael, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.
And so let me ask you this. Who would want to create the impression that we need to engage in military activity, which a lot of the neocons demanded before the ink was even dry on this criminal complaint, against Iran?
Oh, the only people that would benefit from that would be the Israelis and the Saudis. And I think if I was looking at a counterintelligence operation to decide where this information came from, I'd be very interested to see if I could find an Israeli hand or a Saudi hand. Because in the long run, Judge, both Israel and Saudi Arabia are much more dangerous enemies to the United States than the Iranians are. The Iranians are a third-rate military power that we could handle very easily. But, you know, the Congress is crazy for war with Iran. Listen to Senator Graham and Senator McCain and Joe Lieberman. They're owned by the Israelis. The Saudis are very influential. So when you look at these kind of things, you have to ask, who would benefit from the war? The Israelis and the Saudis would love to see our money and our young men and women being killed to fight their enemies in Iran.
All right,
Wait. What's happening in the world? Israel is fighting alongside ISIS? Israel, America's greatest ally in the Middle East. Israel, which receives over $1 billion in U.S. foreign aid, is fighting alongside ISIS to get rid of Assad. I know that's a very incredible claim to make, but just look at the facts. Israel has bombed Syria for the 5th time in 18 months. The Times of Israel is reporting that Israel is giving arms to these Syrian rebels. Haaretz is talking about how there was a deal made with the Syrian rebels, and the Israeli government to get rid of the Golan Heights area. And if Israel helps the rebels get rid of Assad, that the Golan Heights area would be all of Israel to keep. The CFR is talking about how Israel is giving medical treatment to Syrian rebels. There's a picture of President Netanyahu of Israel being in an Israeli hospital treating a Syrian Islamic terrorist, a Syrian rebel.
In fact, ISIS militants are getting medical attention in the Golan Heights and in Israel itself. What does that tell you? There is absolute continuity, but the actual policy, just like the Project for a New American Century laid out very clearly, that a, quote, new Pearl Harbor would be necessary to achieve this goal of full spectrum dominance, you could never tell the American people, or the world for that matter, we're going to fight wars of aggression where we're going to have to invade and occupy.
But I am not going to be party, ever, of any group who seek to liberate themselves from oppression and take weapons and arms from Saudi Arabia and from Qatar and from Turkey. A large number of those who are now fighting Assad in Syria are paid by the Saudis and the Qataris and are trained and have been given arms to go and invade another country. May Allah grant the day will come when Saudi Arabia will be invaded in the same way. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are Zionist countries. Oh yes. Allah says in the Quran, وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّهُمْ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. If you turn to them with friendship and alliance, you belong to them, says Allah. If there are in Syria those who are not connected whatsoever with the Saudis and with Qatar and with Turkey and with the Zionists, okay? Where are you getting your weapons? Oh, we're taking it from the Syrian army. Very convenient answer. Very convenient answer. Even if you have your own weapons, you do not launch your struggle at this time to liberate yourself. This is the wrong time, because you're going to be used as guinea pigs. Whatever success you achieve will be beneficial to them. So you're acting very foolishly to use this moment, the second Arab Spring, to get rid of Assad. Choose a different time, not a time when Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the Zionists are sending men into Turkey armed with weapons and financed by them and trained by them. Choose another time, not this time. Okay? So I know about oppression. It's not just in Syria, of course. There's more oppression in Saudi Arabia. How many of them going to Saudi Arabia to liberate Saudi Arabia?
There's a certain inconsistency. I'm very worried about getting involved in a new war in Syria. And people say, well, Assad is such a bad guy. He is. But on the other side, we have Al-Qaeda and now Nusra. And then they say there are some pro-Western people, and they say, oh, we're going to vet them. Well, apparently we've got a senator over there who had his picture taken with some kidnappers, so I don't know how good a job we're going to do vetting those who are going to get the arms. So there's two ironies you have to overcome if you want to get involved in the war in Syria. The first irony is you will be allied with Al-Qaeda. The second irony is most of the Christians are on the other side. So you may be arming Islamic rebels who may well be killing Christians.
We are where we are because we are where we are because we armed the Syrian rebels. We have been fighting alongside Al-Qaeda, fighting alongside ISIS. ISIS is now emboldened in 2 countries. But here's the anomaly. We're with ISIS in Syria. We're on the same side of the war. So those who want to get involved to stop ISIS in Iraq are allied with ISIS in Syria. That is the real contradiction to this whole policy.
Right, and many of you...
And again, remember the occult significance of the word Isis. It's an Egyptian goddess and deity that is a favorite of the occult mysteries and secret societies that run this planet. So it's no coincidence here, this terrorist so-called extremist group called ISIS. And what do we have here? Is it also merely a coincidence, merely coincidental, that there's a contractor, U.S. government, called ISIS? Yes, Oh, coincidence, I'm sure. ISIS provides worldwide security, intelligence, technology, and training to government and private enterprises. Our Washington, D.C. office is located in Ronald Reagan Building. We are dedicated to supporting our national defense and security departments, as well as government contractors and private business, with mission and critical services performed by highly skilled experts in their fields. Interesting. U.S. Armed Forces, U.S. government, and prime contractors on the ground in such strategic environments as the Middle East. See our locations map at the bottom. Multinational forces, Iraq, theater-wide security services. Interesting choice word. Theater-wide. Department of Defense, DOD. Anything else in Iraq? Sure. Iraqi voting legislature. Personal protective services, Iraq Coalition for Peace. Client, contract, supported organization. As you can see, now you know who is really ISIS, who is really...
That ISIS, just like Al-Qaeda, was created by the CIA. They trained them in Jordan. Backed and funded by Saudi Arabia and Israel. Just showed you the other day how Israel struck 9 key spots in Syria, and who was there to take over on the ground? ISIS. That was 100% proof they're working together in this, and they're going to lie right to your face in the media. I've shown you solid proof. They tried to bait Iran into this. Iran said, no, I don't think so. You're ISIS. Went back to their country, put their troops on the border, and started sending heavy artillery across. They've been flying drones, sending 140 tons of military equipment per day. And at the same time, ISIS holds a parade with all of the captured U.S. military vehicles as far as the eye can see. And guess what? Obama wants to send them 500 million more. And that's the truth.
The local population here in the town of Bilad has been mobilized. Soldiers were coming to pick up food from this mosque. A fighter from a smaller Shia militia had, like many of them, spent years in American prisons in Iraq for fighting the Western occupation.
Win-win, God willing. ISIS is a Jewish-Israeli movement established by a dirty hand to destroy Iraq.
מה שישראל לאחרונה נמצאות מתצו כמה עניינים. מה שרואה עוד, וגם מצו שעדיין משיח בו. אז הייתה משהו ממה הגיעתו. הכנראה שהיא מספיק, כאילו שהיום כבר כמה שעות בגיל עדיין לבוא. אבל יש עוד כמה שעות, אבל יש להשתדל גם היום, בבשורות טובות. זה שמחה וטוב לבוא. כדי שחסידים מקפידים שכל מנהיגים את שמחה. בשורות טובות, הצלחה רבה.
Does it not make you a bit uncomfortable that the Christian right here in America, which backs Israel fervently, really does so because they think Jesus is going to return? Many of them believe he will do so in their lifetime. And when Jesus returns, he must return to whence he came. And what he's going to do when he gets there, basically, is convert all the Jews or kill them.
Well, you know, let's argue about that point when it happens, right? But...
only plan likely to bring tranquility, freedom, and justice to the region. The one-state solution, in which the entire Middle East is given to the Jews. That's right. The one-state solution is a proposal of genius that would not only help the Palestinians, but would instantly achieve the noblest goals of the so-called Arab Spring. For instance, turning the entire Middle East into one big Israel will secure religious freedom for everyone in the area. Indeed, once the entire Middle East becomes Israel, most of the region's Arabs will be freer and better off in every way than they've ever been before.
General Wesley Clark, you probably remember him, he had a very famous interview on Democracy Now! Where he said that post the staged terror attacks of September 11, 2001, he got a memo allegedly from then Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, that said that the United States federal government would be launching an aggressive invasion and attack of countries in the Middle East.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." Look, ISIS got started through funding from our friends and allies. This got started through funding from our friends and allies.
This is a valedictorian, a Rhodes Scholar. I believe he went to West Point, saying it's the U.S. and her allies that created ISIS, ISIL, the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service, out of thin air as a smokescreen so we can go and fight these wars that the general didn't even understand post-September 11th, 2001.
"Will take up my name in vain and mislead many, and they will follow the ways of the Pharisees and not the true path of the pure oblation." And that's something, remember the message I just gave? Now, I didn't know this was there. I just gave a message to you guys recently about the traditions of the Pharisees. I said even Rabbi Singer says that the Orthodox Jews of today are the Pharisees of 2,000 years ago. And I said,
"If you will not stand with Israel and the Jews, then I will not stand with you."
The Jewish people as a whole did not reject Jesus as Messiah. It will also prove that Jesus did not come to earth to be the Messiah. Since Jesus refused by word and deed to claim to be the Messiah, how can the Jews be blamed for rejecting what was never offered? Read it.
The Orthodox Jews of today are the Pharisees of 2,000 years ago. And I said they're blind. Yeshua says in the Gospels of the King James that they are blind leaders of the blind. And so if you want to go back into Pharisaic traditions as Jews that are believing the Messiah to be Messiah, and you take back up these traditions, you will perish in your sins. There's no way around it. And he says right here, "For hands dripping with the innocent blood of creatures will take up my name in vain and mislead many, and they will follow the ways of the Pharisees and not the true path of the pure oblation." You know, I think I had a question asked to me not long ago. Said, "Brother Steve, what do you think about this? Would they restart the sacrificial services?" They may. But let me tell you something. That's not what God's interested in. Yeshua has died for us. And believe me, God would put a stop to it. Because His blood is what was poured out for our sins. And we must believe in Him. And if you believe in Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, you will be pardoned from your sins. If you do not, you will not be pardoned. I don't care how many Pharisaic traditions you want to take up. It'll do you no good. You've got to believe Yeshua the way Yeshua was, not the way you think He is, not the way you want Him to be, not the way the church has made Him to be. You got to know who He is. And you got to believe Him in the power that He came in the power of the resurrection.